Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Welcome to another episode of Love and Abuse. I'm so glad you're here. If this is your first time, welcome to the show. And what I talk about in this show is all of the abusive behavior that we have to deal with, typically in close relationships. And that could be family, that could be romantic, that could even be your coworker. You may not call those close relationships, but any relationships that you have, I want to get the information out there to you about manipulative behavior, about emotionally abusive behavior or psychologically abusive behavior. You might hear it called verbally abusive behavior. Any type of unhealthy, poisonous, or toxic communication, as I said in the intro. And the reason I'm doing this is because life can be so much better, A, once you identify the poisonous or toxic communication styles of other people, and B, you're not stuck in a relationship that you can't figure out what's going on. And, the majority of people I hear from that are in some sort of toxic relationship or toxic communication, they tell me, I didn't even realize that I was in an emotionally abusive relationship or a toxic relationship, or I didn't even realize what they were doing to me or saying to me or how they were making me feel. I just put that on myself. And you'll find that a lot in emotionally abusive relationships, especially. You will find that the victim of emotional abuse blames themselves. And if you find yourself blaming yourself, then there might be something more going on. Because typically the person who blames themselves will understand what they're doing and try to change it. Or at least figure out what they're doing. They'll work on themselves. They'll try to process what possible behavior they're doing to someone else and try to change that behavior. You work on yourself. Instead of just thinking, oh, it's all my fault, I do this every time. Usually the self-aware person is going to look at their life and look at their behavior and wonder what they can do differently to get better results. The person that wants to control, that wants to emotionally abuse, however, doesn't see what they're doing as wrong. Typically, they might think, well, that person needs to be controlled. That person needs to compromise their values. That person needs to follow my lead because what they're doing, I don't like. It doesn't conform to my standards. It doesn't conform to my way of life. And therefore, I need to judge them and control them and manipulate them and coerce them. And that's not ethical or moral behavior. And I will say that sometimes these people don't even know they're doing it. In my old life, I was emotionally abusive. I didn't realize I was emotionally abusive. I didn't even know that term. But when I was married, I was emotionally abusive toward my wife. I made her feel guilty. I made her feel like she was the problem. And she believed it, to a certain extent. But she was a strong person before the marriage. She had a very healthy, independent spirit. And I unfortunately broke that down. And she, fortunately, was smart enough to tap back into that independent spirit and tap back into that high self-worth and high self-esteem, all the stuff that she'd worked on in her life, so that she could look at the marriage and realize how toxic it was. If you've heard me talk about this before, the marriage did start to take a turn for the better near the end when I realized I was being awful. But that turn was too late because she fell out of love with me. And it was the best decision for both of us because what she did was break me of my toxic cycle and showing me that I was to be accountable for my behavior. And so that accountability really hit home and made me realize, wow, I'm really messing up all my relationships in my life. Not just my marriage, but every relationship that I've had up to this point, I have failed in some way. These were my words. I have failed every relationship in some way. I've failed my partner in some way. how have I done that? And near the end of my marriage, I started asking those questions like, wow, my marriage is ending? This is supposed to last for the rest of our lives. So what am I doing wrong? I'm looking at myself as the common denominator finally, and realizing it wasn't the people I was with that were the problem. I mean, we all have our issues and we all have to work through them, but I certainly was a major factor in every breakup that I went through. And they all broke up with me. They all left me. So this is where I look at myself, I look at my life, and I realize that I was the common denominator for all this. So what was I doing? And, I've told this story in other episodes, so I won't get into it too deep. But the person who manipulates or causes their partner to feel bad about themselves will hopefully realize that's what they're doing and will hopefully connect with empathy and stop doing it. That was my path. A lot of people don't follow that path. A lot of people want to stay on their path. They want to control the other person. They want to make sure that the other person conforms to their way of life. And the emotional abuser wants to control the environment, wants to control the people, and wants to make life better for them by making everyone else and everything else conform to their standards. So the point of all this, the reason I'm telling you this, is because if you're listening to this show, you're probably either tired of being treated a certain way or in a situation that you can't figure out exactly what's going on, and you want to define it, you want to label it, you want to get out of the quagmire, you want to get into a clearer space in your head. And that's important because when you're in this type of relationship, your head is so foggy, you cannot see clearly, and you will tend to end up blaming yourself. If you're the victim of emotional abuse, you will end up blaming yourself for the other person's behavior because at a deeper level, you think you deserve it. Or you think, of course, why would they treat me so bad? So I must be doing something wrong, instead of pointing the finger where it really needs to be pointed, at the other person. Not that you both don't play a role. Of course, you both play a role. My wife played the role of the enabler. I don't blame her for this. I'm not blaming her for the breakdown of our relationship. I blame me. But she certainly, by staying in the relationship for the number of years that she did, she helped to facilitate my behavior. Again, wasn't her fault. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm putting anything on her because she doesn't deserve that. But if she were aware of what my behavior was doing to her, and if she wasn't such in a self-blaming mode, and if she fully understood what emotional abuse was, she would have said, wait. You need to stop doing what you're doing. This isn't my fault. You are causing these problems. I'm not. You're making me feel bad when you're supposed to make me feel good because you're my husband, and on and on and on. And so looking at relationships, there's almost always an enabler, and there's almost always a person who does bad behavior. So that's how you both play a role in any type of relationship. Again, family, friends, coworkers, any type of relationship. How you respond and what you do and say is either going to enable more bad behavior or disable it. And I prefer the role of disabler over enabler. What's a disabler? A disabler fully embraces how they want to be treated and enforces it. If someone's doing bad behavior, the disabler is going to look at that bad behavior and say, I don't want that behavior in my life. You better stop that right now. Or they'll just walk away from it. There's several ways to handle how you tackle bad behavior in your life, but to disable that bad behavior is basically to stop enabling it. What do you do to enable it? You might get upset and say, that really hurts. Don't do that again. And then they do it again, but there's no accountability. When I was married, my wife disabled the bad behavior by providing me accountability. She left. She didn't want to be around me. She wanted a divorce. It was one of the hardest moments of my life, but it was also freeing for her and me because that disabling stopped my processes, stopped my vicious pattern. I'm not saying everyone will experience the end of a relationship like that, but someone who has access to empathy and compassion and sympathy will realize that their behavior is causing the problem and start to reflect on it and start to work on themselves and heal themselves, hopefully. So in order to disable someone's behavior, you have to present greater and greater levels of accountability. Accountability is vital to disable bad behavior. So one of the points that maybe you can take away from this episode is don't be an enabler, become a disabler. That does come with consequences. It does come with risk. I'm not saying you just jump into disabling. I'm saying you start to think about it this way. Just start thinking about disabling bad behavior in a way that helps you move in that direction. Because if you just start disabling right away, then you might have serious life changes that you're not ready for. This is why people in very difficult or abusive relationships can't leave right away. Some people think they can't leave at all, but you'll see someone in an abusive relationship and you might say, wow, you should leave that person. They're so abusive. Yet they're not ready for that major life change. That is a jump into an abyss that they are so afraid of because of whatever, security, money, losing friends, losing family, losing kids, losing their home. There's so much involved that it can be very difficult to take that on. And so when you're in that space where you can't necessarily provide the accountability because it will affect you in a major way, it can be very difficult to reach that level of taking action in your life. At the same time, I'm a proponent of taking the action and dealing with the consequences as they come, as long as I get away from the source of what I sometimes call relationship radiation. Because if you are constantly being irradiated by this negative, toxic force, your psyche is going to disintegrate. It's going to take a hit every day. And you have to start worrying about you as a person, as a whole being, disintegrating, as opposed to worrying about what's going to happen with your money, what's going to happen with your finances, what's going to happen with your friends and family, what's going to happen with your kids. Even though those are just as important, I understand that, sometimes even more important. But without you as this person that can experience all that, what is that? What is a home without you to experience it? What are kids without you to experience it? What are family and friends without you? You know what I mean? You as a whole, WHOLE, to experience it. Because if you start to disappear because of the abuse in your life, then you won't be there to experience all these other things. That's why making you number one is vital. It's important. You need to take care of yourself so that you can experience the world. And this is another reason I do this show, is to make sure that you stay in touch with yourself, that you reconnect with yourself if you've lost some or a lot of yourself, to reconnect with yourself at the deepest level you can, to show yourself love and care and compassion so that you don't lose yourself in any relationship that you're in. All of this is sort of a precursor for what I'm talking about today, which is what's called the smear campaign. Now, the smear campaign is when somebody tarnishes your good name, your reputation, you in general, as a bad person. You're a bad mom or dad, you're a bad friend, or you're a liar, you're an infidel, you're trying to ruin the home, you're trying to take my kids away from me, you're trying to turn my family against me, you're trying to get me fired. Whatever lie someone can come up with and make it appear that you said it or did it, they're going to do. They're going to smear you. And this can be devastating to someone experiencing this, because it gets very, very difficult to defend yourself and try to tell people that what they're hearing is wrong, what they're hearing is lies. Because what the smear campaign does is put you on the defense so much that you start to appear crazy. And this is very similar to the gaslighting and crazy making in a relationship, even without the smearing, because somebody can convince you that you're going crazy just by doing some very subtle things. I mean, just a simple conversation where the emotionally abusive person says something to you, and then later on you bring that up and they say, "What? I never said that to you." And you say, "Of course you did. I remember." And they say, "No, I know I didn't say that to you." And you said, "I know you did." You start to question yourself. Well, maybe I'm wrong. And this isn't a one-time event. This is what happens over and over again. where it happens so often that you start to believe what they're saying instead of believing yourself. And that's one of the components of crazy making, is that you start to lose faith and trust in yourself. And as soon as that starts happening, it's a snowball that gets bigger and bigger as it rolls down the hill faster and faster, and you've got to stop it. And if it's already started, you need to, again, reconnect with yourself. Who are you at the core level? If you're an honest, kind, generous, and caring person, you're still that person. You've just been convinced otherwise if you believe anything else. So what you need to do is remind yourself that you are this at your core, that you are ethical, that you are moral, that you do your best, that you try your best. And because of that, you really are more than another person says you are. And what's tough is that the person that you trust and love in your life might be doing this to you. You have to redefine what love means. You have to redefine what healthy communication is, because if they're causing you to feel bad about yourself because of some coping mechanism or survival mechanism in them, you can't take that on. You have to separate their behavior from who you are. And that's tough to do because you're so interconnected in so many ways. But this is part of what I'm talking about today with the smear campaign. You have to separate their behavior from who you are. You can't look at yourself as what they say you are or what they say you're doing, because you're not that. And in fact, if you get upset by what they're saying about you, yes, it hurts. It feels painful. It feels insulting. It feels like a betrayal. It feels like so many things. But again, separate yourself from their dysfunction so that you don't take it on as a hit on who you are at the deepest level. You have to separate that. So that's sort of step one with the smear campaign, is separate yourself from what they say and what they do, because those are survival mechanisms for them. They need to feed their dysfunction. They need to be enabled. In order to enable that dysfunction, they need you to step out of your self-worth and self-esteem and lovableness and confidence in yourself. They need to break that down in you so that you're hurt, so that you're injured. If you're injured in any way emotionally, that helps them continue their dysfunctional cycle, making you feel bad and making them feel good. This might be hard to hear for some people because you may not believe that they feel good making you feel bad. But you also have to remember that it's a dysfunction causing that behavior. They are feeding off of your feeling bad to make themselves feel good because they don't believe there's enough space in the world for someone else to feel good at the same time they feel good. They believe in order to feel good, they have to make someone else feel bad. And so this isn't about you, it's about them. It's about what they believe and how they need to fulfill themselves to find happiness. So just remember that their dysfunctional behavior isn't about you. You're involved because you became connected. Maybe you're in love with them, or maybe they're family and there is love there, or maybe they're just a coworker and you're affected because you thought you were friends. You just have to remember that their dysfunctional behavior doesn't define you. It doesn't point out any flaws in you. It doesn't show you that maybe you're really not worthy. It doesn't do anything except reveal who they are. What ends up defining you is your response to their behavior. And this is where I want to go next with the smear campaign, is that when you respond to their behavior, make sure you don't add fuel to the fire that's already burning with any type of emotional reaction. In fact, look at it this way. This is going to sound a little weird, but your emotional response, your upset, your defensiveness, is what fulfills the prophecy for them. Probably a little strange to say it that way, but the prophecy for them is something they hope will happen to you so that they can reach closure. It is their final destination. If you become upset and defensive, then they have satisfied their criteria to reach closure. And what's closure for them? If you're upset, they have control. If you're unhappy, they're happy. If you're in a place of defensiveness, they feel righteous. Their made-up prophecy says that if they act calm, cool, and collected, they'll reveal the irrational and immoral behavior of an emotionally connected person like yourself. And your defensiveness is exactly what they want. And so what you need to do is practice what's known as gray rock. Gray rock is that dull, boring rock that you find on the ground that you have really no comment about and really no thoughts about and really no emotional connection to. It's just a dull gray rock. And if you act like that dull gray rock when they are trying to fulfill this prophecy of trying to make you upset, trying to make you unhappy, and instead you're just emotionless and even dull to them, they won't reach closure. Now, this does open up the floodgates for even stronger attacks, but this is the first step. In fact, many of these steps are going to bring you down an even deeper hole of dysfunction while they try to regroup and try to attack you at a different angle or using different techniques. So this process, I'm just going to tell you, is not easy. In fact, you do have to experience a little bit more pain before you get out of this. Because the smear campaign is something that they will do relentlessly until you break. But the idea is not to break. The idea is to, and we're going to talk about this, realize that you are who you are and you're not the person they're describing. If you realize and fully believe you are who you are good, you are moral, you are ethical, and you separate yourself from their lies, from their behavior, then it's going to help you become less affected, more gray rock, and hopefully even stoic. Because stoic, you can approach things more practically. Because remember, your defensiveness and your upset is exactly what they want. So try not to fulfill that prophecy. Another thing that I want to address is that they are going to try to convince your friends, your family, and everyone that you know mutually, and maybe only the people that you associate with, they're going to want to try to convince other people how bad you are, how wrong you are, how much of a liar you are, how irrational you are, all of the above. They're going to do their best convincing others, and they are going to be convincing because people are going to believe them. So you need to accept this now, is that they're going to do their best to convince others, because guess who's acting stoically then? They are. So I'm going to mention stoic a few times, and if you don't know what stoic means, it means not so much being emotionally reactive, but seeing things more logically and analytically, but still having emotions. I mean, you're not disconnected like a Vulcan in Star Trek, but you still have emotions. You just don't let them drive your behavior. You don't jump into fight or flight mode. You don't get too upset. You can become angry. You can become upset inside you, but what you do next, it helps to have a stoic approach. It helps to have a more grounded, more balanced approach. And with the smear campaign, very hard to do, very hard to have that stoic, grounded, balanced approach. But if you do, if you can follow these guidelines, it's going to work out for the best. So when the other person tries to convince other people and they get convinced, the emotional abuse term is called flying monkeys. If you've ever watched The Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch had flying monkeys at her disposal, and she could summon them and make them do anything that she wanted. Because that's what a typical narcissist, sociopath, emotional abuser will do. They'll get a rally of support that will believe anything they say. And you know, most emotional abusers are charming. They seem kind to the outside world. They seem caring. They seem generous. And quite often they are to the outside world. But to you, they're the opposite. And they're dangerous to your psyche, to your emotional state, or even to your physical state if they get worse. But you have to remember that these flying monkeys are the ones that believe them and will look at you differently, will look down at you, will even feel bad for you because the person in attack mode is trying every tactic to make other people look at you in a certain way. It's not just about making you out to be a liar. They can also make you out to be mentally unstable. They can also make you out to be completely irrational. It doesn't matter. They can do a number of things to make you look like there's something going on in your life, and this is why you're doing what you're doing. So I want you to be prepared for that. When the smear campaign starts to happen, all kinds of perspectives are going to pop up about you. And so when you're prepared, oh, they see me as crazy. Oh, they see me as unstable. Oh, they see me as a person who got abused in her childhood, so doesn't know how to act in adult situations. And on and on and on. Unfortunately, all of these perspectives are going to come out of the woodwork. And so I want you to be prepared for that mentally. Because if you are, then when it comes at you, you won't have that highly charged emotional response. Remember, stoic. Remember, don't fulfill their prophecy. You want to appear to others as calm and reasonable as possible so that there's no justification for the behavior that they think you're doing. And let me just reiterate that. The flying monkeys, those people that believe the person trying to smear you, are going to look for behavior in you to justify what they believe. And if you show them that behavior, it becomes justified, and now they have no doubt that they are who your emotional abuser has convinced them of. Once they get that justification, it's going to be even harder to work your way out of it or defend yourself with it. This is why you have to remember that if you just let the flying monkeys fly, if you just let them believe whatever they want to believe without trying to defend yourself, and this is the hard part, don't try to defend yourself. Let them believe what they want to believe. Don't try to convince anyone. Don't call anyone up saying what you're hearing is lies. Just let those flying monkeys believe what they want to believe and come to their own conclusion for now. The reason I say that is because people are smart if you give them a chance. They will figure out that something doesn't add up. They'll figure out that what they're hearing doesn't really sound like you, yet it does sound plausible. So they look for that justification in your responses. Once again, your goal is try not to justify their beliefs. I'm going to give you some good responses when this happens in a moment, but just remember, try not to justify what they're looking for. They're looking for any erratic or irrational or upset or highly emotionally charged response from you so they can justify what they've been convinced of. Again, remember that people are smart. They're going to figure it out. In fact, I have a personal story about that. When I was in high school, my friend Patrick and I were friends with this girl, and I don't know what we said or did, but she got upset at us, and she did not like us. It wasn't anything bad. It was just she took something wrong, or I don't know what it was. But what she ended up doing was telling everyone she knew that we were gay. We weren't gay, but she told everyone she knew, our friends and her friends, that we were gay. And she would say, I know they're gay. I know they're a gay couple. And it was strange to us. I mean, that was kind of an odd thing to start spreading. But instead of defending ourselves, instead of saying anything opposing what she was saying, we decided to just ignore it. It's exactly what we did. We just ignored it and waited to see what would happen. And people would come up to us and say, so-and-so says you're gay. And our response was, well, okay. And we didn't defend ourselves. We didn't agree. We didn't disagree. We just said, oh, okay. I also remember saying something like, well, that's interesting, but nothing else. We were so calm and pretty much gray rock. We decided to just be sort of ignorant about it and sort of uncaring about it. We didn't let it bother us. Inside, I was kind of ticked off. I wanted to stop her. I wanted to convince other people, hey, that's not true. But I just decided not to care. And lo and behold, a few days later, she stopped saying it and it disappeared. The rumors disappeared, and eventually people realized that it wasn't true. Because people are smart. I mean, that's what happens, is that when you don't add fuel to the fire by becoming defensive, by becoming upset, then you empower people to come up with their own conclusions. And it's always easier to believe someone when they're not trying to convince you of something. Because Patrick and I could have said, you know what, that's not true, and let me tell you why. We could have done that. When you do something like that, it can actually make you look guilty. When you're trying to convince someone that something's not true, it can make you look guilty. Not always, but it can. And so that's why a more stoic or grounded or gray rock response can be useful when there's a smear campaign against you. And because we weren't upset, because we weren't trying to defend ourselves, and she could see that her attempt to injure or hurt us in some way wasn't working because we didn't appear to be hurt, we didn't appear to be affected, she stopped doing it. There was no reason to continue. It's very similar to how bullying works. Bullying works when you get upset or you become defensive or you become afraid. Bullying works because of your response. And when someone's trying to bully you and you are upset, you're afraid, or you run away, it feeds the bully's ego. It makes them feel powerful. And when they feel powerful, they'll do it again and again. I actually talk about that at theoverwhelmedbrain.com. If you look up bullying, I talk about my story, my history of bullying also in high school, and how I was able to get out from under being bullied. It's very helpful if you're in that situation as well. But when it comes to smearing, remembering that the less emotional response that you can have, the better, there's less fuel to the fire. Another thing to remember is that the flying monkeys, those who believe the person smearing you can't control them anyway. They're either going to blindly believe that person's stories or not. And if they blindly follow what the emotional abuser is saying about you, then you really have to question the validity of your relationship with those people anyway. People who blindly follow what someone convinces them of, you won't be able to get through to them. You can't. They're just sheeple, and you just have to have faith that they're going to figure it out on their own. And those that choose not to research it any further or dig any further, again, you have to question the validity of your relationship with them. And so it may come to the point where you lose friends or family. It may come to that point. But also, you can't really have people around you that don't have faith and trust and confidence in you as a person anyway, because those aren't the right kind of support that you need. You need supporters that have more critical minds, where they'll ask you questions like, hey, you know what? So-and-so said this about you. What's going on there? And you might be upset inside, but you say, you know what? They're spreading lies about me, and I don't know how to stop it, but I'm just ignoring it. There's one response that you can have. They're spreading lies about me, and I don't know how to stop it, so I'm just ignoring it. And a supportive person in your life is going to say, wow, I know you better than that. That doesn't sound like you at all. But I wanted to get your side of the story. And you might say, you know what? There's not much I can tell you. It's just a lie. And then you just drop it. You don't go into the story. You don't say, oh, he or she is doing this because I said this, or I did that, or I'm breaking up with them. You don't go into the story. So this could be one of your responses. And just remember that supportive people are going to look for the facts. They're going to dig for the truth. The people who have been your friends, they're going to dig. They may be convinced by this other person, but they're still going to ask questions. They're not going to blindly follow. And those that do blindly follow, they're going to have to find out the truth for themselves. And again, remember, people are smart. If you don't justify their beliefs, they're going to figure it out eventually. And those that don't, you may lose as a family or a friend for now. But let me let you in on something that's very helpful to know, is that the emotionally abusive person eventually reveals themselves. They do. They will eventually be revealed, because what ends up happening is that the less responsive you are, at least emotionally responsive, the more they try to make you look bad. And the more they try to make you look bad, the worse they look. And so what ends up happening is they come up with even more elaborate stories to make you the bad guy, and even more over-the-top scenarios that they're trying to convince people. And people will be like, where is this coming from? This doesn't sound like that person at all. And the flying monkeys will no longer be flying monkeys. They'll be critical thinkers that try to figure out the truth and dig even deeper. So remember, the truth gets revealed soon enough. Those that believe all the stories about you and all the negativity that they're hearing, you're not going to be able to do anything about anyway. But most people are going to dig a little further. Most people are going to figure out what the truth is. And that's why it's important not to become highly defensive or upset in front of these people. And that can even be one of your responses. One of your responses to someone who comes up and say, I can't believe you're doing this to him or her. I can't believe you would do this to your kids. I can't believe this or that. If somebody comes up to you, one of their flying monkeys comes up to you and says that, you just take a deep breath inside and just say something stoic like, the truth will be revealed soon enough. And you can even follow up with this. Do your own digging and figure out what's really going on. Don't always rely on the source of the story. Look for proof yourself. When you say something like that to someone, you empower them to make their own decision for themselves. People who are empowered to make their own decisions are more likely to believe what they come up with themselves. So that's why it's important not to try to convince anyone of the truth, just to say something like, you know what, the truth will be revealed soon enough. And you could even say, don't always believe what you hear, but don't expand on that. Don't tell any story. Remember Stoicism. And the reason I keep mentioning Stoicism is because when you're dealing with the smear campaign, gray rock might be a little too unattached, a little too unemotional. It does work and it can work, but Stoicism allows you to show a grounded, more balanced side of you so that when people do start questioning what you're doing or what you're saying or whatever, they'll see this balanced person and they'll wonder if what they heard was true. So that's why I kind of lean more towards Stoicism, but remembering that gray rock is also a very effective tool as well. And, talking about the smear campaign, it reminds me of the movie Dirty Dancing. If you've never seen this movie, there's a part of the movie where Johnny, the main character, he's a dancer and he has friends that are dancers, and one of his friends gets pregnant. And so Johnny was blamed for this pregnancy by this man. I don't want to tell you the whole story. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. And this man said, you know what? I see that you got your partner in trouble and that's all I see. And Johnny says, well, you would see that, wouldn't you? And of course, it wasn't Johnny that got her pregnant, but this guy looked at Johnny and judged him to be the kind of guy to get her pregnant. And then I think there was an abortion in the movie, and to get an abortion. And he just saw Johnny as this unruly, unethical, immoral guy. And instead of being defensive or upset, Johnny decided to give the stoic answer of, well, you would see that, wouldn't you? He put it back on the person blaming him or judging him. And that can be very effective. Let me give you something else that you can say to respond to people when they say, oh, so-and-so said this about you. You can say something like, and you believe that? That's how the movie Dirty Dancing inspired me, is that instead of having an emotional reaction, being upset, being defensive, just ask the person who's trying to say that you're all these things, one of the flying monkeys, and you believe that? This causes them to question themselves. This causes them to see again that you're not justifying what they believe about you, but it makes them face their own perceptions. If I ask you, wait, do you believe that? You're going to go inside. You're going to reflect. You're going to figure this out for yourself. And so anyone who approaches you and says, so-and-so is saying this about you, I can't believe you would do that. A stoic response like, and you believe that? Can be very helpful. And it's not a defensive stance. I mean, the attacker wants you to be defensive, but it just gives the person a chance to ask themselves what they believe. Again, it's important to empower people with the choice to believe what they want to believe instead of trying to convince them what to believe. Remember, the less convincing that you try to do, the more convincing the attacker, the emotional abuser, becomes. And this is good news for you because they're going to sound crazier and crazier. And that's exactly what they want people to think about you. They're going to sound more irrational. I've heard stories of people who use the smear campaign becoming so frustrated that they make up such outlandish lies that it's impossible to believe them. Because they get frustrated. They become scared that you're not going to be under their control, that you're not going to be upset, that you're not going to be affected. They get scared when you're not affected. This is why you'll eventually win, because people see through other people that want them to believe crazy things. They'll even prepare their flying monkeys by telling them that, oh, they're always flipping out, they're always getting angry, they're always getting upset. And when the flying monkey approaches you and they're looking for that justification and you get upset, that's the validation that the person smearing you is correct. These are tricky, I understand. This is something that they're very good at doing. They're very good at making you feel like you're being attacked, like you're being bullied, and making you feel powerless. But prove them wrong by not jumping into your defensive stance. Your upset and defensiveness is what keeps you as the victim and keeps them as the victor. So to reverse this, you have to let them reveal themselves. There are ways to reveal them, but if you do so, you'll get a hailstorm of more smearing, and it just creates hell for you. It's already hell, but it's going to create a worse hell if you try to expose them. If you record a phone conversation and you play it for people, it's going to make them even more angry, more frustrated, and really come down even harder on you. So that's why a more neutral approach, I believe, is required. So I filled this episode with a lot of information, and it's because when you're getting smeared, there's a lot of psychological stuff that you have to deal with. There's your emotional state. There's the part of you that wants to defend yourself. There's the part of you that wants to convince others. You have so many things pulling you to do something. And for me to sit here and say, oh, just do nothing, or just do these few things, it might be very hard to accept. It might be very hard for you to come into that place because you want to fight back or defend yourself so badly. And you deserve to do that, absolutely, because you're being bullied. You are being intimidated. You are being smeared, and it's all wrong. It's all bad. But in order to get through this, you have to do it a certain way. You have to approach this in a way that doesn't make it worse, but makes it better. And again, you're going to hit a dip before you hit a rise. You're going to have to go into that valley before you go up toward the peak. In other words, it gets worse before it gets better, but it does get better. Remember this. Realize that you are witnessing a mental breakdown of that person, and they fear losing full control of you. Now, you could sit back and watch them break down and just enjoy the show, but that's hard to do because they're purposely trying everything they can to break you. However, remember that they desperately want you to suffer. That's not healthy. That's not right. That's not something a sane, mentally stable person does. So they're having a mental breakdown. They're not right in the head. When they're in the smear campaign, they're in fight or flight. They are trying to survive, trying to keep the control in their life, trying to make you suffer so that they can prosper. And when you act defensive or upset, it's like a high for them. Your suffering makes them happy. And I know that doesn't sound good at all. It probably is upsetting to hear that. Like, why would they want me to suffer? It's not about you. It's about them. It's about them losing control of the person they have been controlling in their life. And you will get through this if you remember that the less you show your upset to anyone, the more crazy they look. The less you show your anger about the lies, the more people will question the truth. The more trust that you show in the people that believe the lies, that they'll figure it out for themselves, the more they will show you that they are capable of seeing the truth. And finally, remember that the person trying to smear you is relying on you to jump into fear mode because they know that you don't want to look bad and lose friends. They're relying on you to be so afraid that people won't love you anymore that they know that you'll do anything to prevent that. Their tactic is to make you so scared that you won't be loved anymore that you'll crack and become desperate yourself. So I want you to remember my words to you, which is embrace your lovableness. Embrace that you are amazing. Embrace that your worth comes from inside and not outside of you. Step into the full confidence that you are a good person who is taking the high road. Don't be responsive to their attacks. Be proactive about self-love, self-care, and self-compassion. If you're dealing with someone smearing you right now, you do have a tough road ahead of you, but it won't last long. Once you stop fueling the fire, there's nothing more for them to feed off of. Don't be the fuel. And don't worry about what the world thinks of you. We're all smart. We'll figure out the truth. Just focus on what you can do to show up without concern for untruths. After all, if what they say isn't true, you really have nothing to worry about anyway. Give your fears a break and watch their breakdown unfold before you as you become the grounded and balanced person you need to be for this to dissolve all on its own. Let knowing thyself move you forward. When you embrace your true self, the lies will bounce off of you. share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. If you want to pinpoint the exact behaviors causing the difficulties in your relationship, including identifying all the signs of possible emotional abuse, control, and manipulation, head over to loveandabuse.com. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant, because you are. Thank you for joining me today. We'll talk again soon.